Testing, testing. Well, the lights are on. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the, buenos dias, nicely done. Welcome to the Bible Hour. It's a little chillier than I thought it would be. The last time I was here, I was sweating bullets, and I thought, not gonna happen this time. I'm gonna make sure I dressed appropriately, and look at this, I got chills. It's good to be back. It's been a while. I don't know, for those of you who might remember me, I think 2020 might have been the last time. It was pandemic season, and my car had died. I don't know if you were around. A Toyota Camry that we had for 20 years died on a highway here on our way to Okoboji, and we had to be rescued. So that was my fond exit memory, years ago. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Juan Hernandez. I am a professor of biblical studies at Bethel University in Minnesota. I've been there, I think I'm about to start my 20th year. And so, Okoboji has been something that we've been able to do because of a connection through Bethel. Ross Van Clay, which most of you may know, was a student, and that's how we ended up connecting and then being here at Okoboji, and we've loved it ever since. Last time we spoke, I think we did the book of Revelation. Maybe did Revelation one time before that, and then we had done the 4 Gospels. I think that might have been the first one years ago. My daughter, I think she might have been in middle school. She's now in college, so it's been a while. What I'd like to do this morning is talk in greater depth about John's Gospel. John's Gospel, if you'll recall, is very different than the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And so what I'd like to do this week is do a deep dive into all we can learn about John's Gospel to fully appreciate what his contribution is to the story of Jesus. Every single gospel makes a contribution, right? They say a lot of the same things, but they also kind of throw in things that if you're not paying attention, they're not found in the other gospels. Or if they are found in those gospels, they are found in a different version. And the question is, what do you do with that? How do you make sense of that? What does that contribute to your knowledge of the life and ministry of Jesus? And as we'll see, and as if you've followed along, or if you've seen any of the videos on YouTube, things are very complex, but they are complex by design, right? We cannot expect a word as precious as this to simply be simple. It is more than that. It's rich, it's complex, it's layered, it's textured. It gets you thinking, it inspires you. It can even serve a model for how you ought to think, how you ought to even write if you are a writer, or tell stories. There's a lot more than meets the eye here. And of course, it's hard to tell because, we kind of just read them in a homogenized way. We read them all together. We've been told the story of Jesus over and over again, especially if you've kind of come up in a Christian culture in a certain way, right? And so we're on autopilot. Like you immediately know, I know what this is going to be about, right? And that actually can serve as a blinder, right? Because you're not attuned, right, to see something new or something different. And then when you see it, you're like, well, I didn't even know that was in the Bible, right? I remember teaching some years ago. It was this adult Sunday school class, and there were people in there who had been raised on the gospel for decades. I mean, multiple of my lifetimes, right? They were there when Jesus was around. That's who they were. And I remember after getting through some of the gospel material, and by the way, what I will show you is gospel material. It's not as if I'm going to bring in stuff that's not in the Bible. It's in the Bible, right? She said, with this look of, just kind of surprise and fascination, she says, it's like it's not even the Bible, right? So what does that tell you? That she was raised in a culture that already had a lock on how this should be read, how this should be understood, what questions should be asked, maybe even what questions shouldn't be asked. And what that ends up doing is it kind of numbs you a little bit. You're not prepared to see some things. And when you see them, you're like, well, that can't be right. Well, why can't it? I never thought about it, or no one ever told me, or I guess I had never read it that way. So the goal really is just to kind of take a deep dive into John. Now, of course, we will be meandering in and out of the other Gospels as well as we do it, if only to kind of put John in this brighter light and see what, in fact, his contribution is. And I will tell you, I myself am surprised how John pulls it off, right? Because on the surface, if you look at this material, they all say the same thing. Right? I mean, they're like, that story of Jesus, he's born, he lives, does a few miracles, makes some enemies, walks on water, gets put up on trial on trumped up charges. He gets killed and he rises from the dead, and that's it, right? The plot. You go deep and you realize, it's the plot, but nuanced in different ways. And so this should cause reflection not only on, the way the story is told, but what it might mean. And what you will realize, if you haven't already realized it, is that the stories are structured in such a way to guide your thinking, right? And so, contrary to what you might expect, and our expectation, certainly as modern individuals, is just the facts, ma'am. Tell me what it was. Tell me what happened. And if you can find an archaeological artifact that verifies it, it's like, game over, we won, right? Not so fast. Oftentimes in the way they tell their stories, they're highlighting meaning. They want you to understand certain things about the person and work of Christ that while they may be rooted in some historical event, they have been transformed by a layer of interpretation, right? It's kind of like anyone who tells a story or a compelling biography, right? Sometimes things are told in a way that highlights and magnifies one event, and other stuff gets muted or not mentioned at all. Somebody asks you a highlight reel about your story, right? You know what stories you will tell because you're the hero in that story. There are certain failures that might be left out, right? Or family tree, my dad, especially with Ancestry.com. Oh yeah, we were from Germany as apparently. You never think that you were a slave or that you were some kind of beggar in that family or that somebody lost a family business or that they were all alcoholics. Those things never come up on Ancestry. I was from this region, and this region is known for this, that, and the other. So we also operate with a certain degree of identity and symbolism when it comes to how we tell our stories. Right? We want people surely to know us, things you know about, but there's a symbolism too. This is what I want to be known for, right? It doesn't have to be proud. It's just this is me. This is me also involves a lot of this is not me, right? And sometimes even true things have to be left out because the audience might not understand those true things the way you understand them, right? And so when retelling the stories of Jesus, you want to pay close attention. What's there? What isn't there? And why is that? Right? Now that's not a bad thing. I actually think that's a good thing. They are training your vision to see certain things. Right? It's kind of like, if you ever watch a TV program when the camera hones in on the character, right? A close-up of the face. What happens to everything in the back? Gets blurry, right? Unless they shift the lens and then it gets clear back down and someone in the front here is blurry. Like that's just the way it is. And it's the same thing with Jesus and the story of Jesus. So we're gonna go dive into John. So what I'd like to do to start out is to get you thinking about it. And I want you to pretend, just follow me in pretending, that you are on a desert island. So this is that trope about the desert island, right? You're on a desert island. You've been there for who knows how long, like Robinson Crusoe. You guys familiar with Robinson Crusoe? And Friday comes along and all that, right? Well, let's say you're on a desert island and you've never read the Gospels. Say you're one of those unreached people groups. You've never read the Gospels, right? And one day you're out there on the beach and you're just looking around for coconuts or whatever you do, like on Gilligan's Island, right? And you see a bottle's kind of bobbling and floating up towards the shore, and you run to get it because you haven't spoken to anyone in years. You're by yourself, and of course there's, what's in a bottle? a note, right? Some sort of note. I think there's even like a movie about that, some love story, right? This won't be that love story, but maybe it'll be close. So you grab the bottle, you're so excited, you pull it out, and what is it? It's the Gospel of John. Gospel of John. Maybe not what you were expecting. You don't even know what to do with it, right? You've never seen a gospel, but you grab it, and you don't. There are no libraries on a deserted island, right? So, and I'm assuming, for the sake, let's suspend disbelief, you can read, right? And you start reading. Right? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. And you're going through, and it's like Nicodemus comes by night, and you're like, what is this guy? And he's this teacher, and but he doesn't understand Jesus, and rightfully so, because Jesus is kind of speaking in a confusing way. Then there's a Samaritan woman, and then there's the paralytic at Bethesda, and you're reading these stories. You don't know what to do with them. You're captivated by them. And as will happen, right, because I think we're all a testament to that, the Christian tradition is a testament to that, you're drawn in by the story. You consume the story. You read the story over and over and over again. You imagine all sorts of kinds of things about the scenario. Who are these people, the Samaritans? Who are these high priests? And, what are these sayings? He keeps talking about, I am. Like, what does that mean, right? And so you start to develop a sense of the book. Maybe you even start memorizing it again. And it's one of these interesting human inclinations. It's kind of like poetry, right? How do you know you love poetry? When you start really digesting it and you even memorize it. Because you have to mouth it, right? You have to mouth it. You have to repeat the words, right? Even if they're not scripture, that's what poets do. That's what actors do. So this person on a deserted island is imbibing the scriptures and memorizing them. To what end? Who knows? He doesn't even know where the bottle came from. May have been a missionary on a sinking ship, right? Who tossed it in, one more soul for the Lord before a shark eats me, right? So here's the question. And then, let's say poor fella never gets rescued, croaks like we all do, right? And goes into glory. Here's the question. What will he never have learned about the story of Jesus with only John's gospel? So I'm going to take suggestions. It's rhetorical, but I want you to think about it, and then we'll jot some of this on the board, just as a way of clarifying the distinctive contribution of John. So what would he never have seen? Where was that come from? I just want to point. Okay. Virgin birth? Is that what I heard? Okay, virgin birth. Okay, where is the virgin birth? Luke. Is it anywhere else? This is where the crowd starts to thin. Separate the men from the boys here. Okay, Luke. Where else? Matthew. Anywhere else? What's that? Very cute. Isaiah. That is the prophecy that is cited, right, by Matthew and Luke in terms of the birth of Jesus, the virgin birth. Okay. Mark? Does Mark have a virgin birth? You guys are kingdom people. No virgin birth. So you could say, John, like Mark, neither of them give us a virgin birth, right? Matthew and Luke do. As a matter of fact, in Mark's gospel, Jesus is already a grown-up, right? He just pops out of the gate, beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, Son of God, and he's out there preaching, right? That's it. Nothing, no pre-story, okay? So, if we, last time I did this, I had 3 columns because we focused only on the synoptic gospel. We'll include 4 for John. And the reason I didn't include John, if you'll recall, a long time ago, is because I kept saying John's a maverick. John's a maverick, right? He's different. But we'll include him this time. So we have, basically, we call the birth stories, right? And so this is Matthew, this is Mark, Luke, and then John. So you got a birth narrative, and we'll add a little chunk here for Luke, a birth narrative. No birth narratives in Mark, and certainly John, nothing about his birth, right? I mean, no glimpse of prophecies about his birth, none of the wonderful details surrounding it, which are other details that this person would not have seen, right? Not just the birth or its prediction, but other things as well. You can chime in on those. So what else would this person have not seen or learned about Jesus? What's that? Son of David. Interesting. Son of David. The Son of David is a feature in all 4 Gospels, right? And he's even called such in John, right? However, the way in which the Gospel writers do it is different, right? They all do it a little differently. So for example, in Mark's Gospel, Jesus is definitely the Son of David. No problem. He's called the Son of David, right? But it's a minor motif in this Gospel. Matthew, on the other hand, he kind of really puts the Son of David on steroids, right? And he not only calls Jesus the Son of David, which he is, but he has Jesus in scenarios that make clear he's the Son of David. The genealogy in Matthew's Gospel emphasizes the Son of David from beginning to end. The first thing Jesus' genealogy says is, genealogy of Jesus Christ, Son of David, son of Abraham, right? So there you have David at the forefront. There are places in Matthew's Gospel where Jesus does a miracle and he is addressed as Son of David. That same story in Mark, he's not addressed as Son of David, right? If you'll recall, we talked a little bit about the numerical symbolism of 14 in Matthew's Gospel, where 14 gets mentioned over and over again. Now, number 14 in Hebrew is the equivalent of the letters DVD, the Hebrew letters DVD, which mean David, right? So John will give us a little son of David. He's in there as such, but it's a difference of degree, not kind. What else? Yes. What's that? The coming of the Holy Spirit. Are you saying that John gives us that? Okay. That's an interesting observation, because there is something distinctive about the Holy Spirit in John's Gospel. He is called something that he's not called in any of the other Gospels. Better remember this. What's that? Paraclete. Who said that? Excellent, right here. You're so close, I can't even see you. Okay, Paraclete, yeah. Paraclete, that is language that is not used in Matthew, Mark, or Luke, but John is the only one who calls him the Paraclete. So he does talk about the coming of the Holy Spirit, but he does so in a very distinct way. The Paraclete, which means comforter or advocate, will be there to comfort you. He additionally calls him the Spirit of what's that? Truth, that's right, truth. The Spirit of truth. Again, something the other Gospels don't do. Now, the prediction of the coming of the Holy Spirit in the way that Luke does it, which is what I'm assuming you're referring to, is in Luke, right? The Holy Spirit will come upon you, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then in the book of Acts, it's fulfilled, right? The end of Mark also has a little bit about the coming of the Holy Spirit. But those last few verses of Mark, if you'll recall, there's dispute about their authenticity because they seem to be later. So you do have the Spirit, but it's different. It's different. He will have encountered a different kind of Spirit in John. What else will you not have learned about Jesus? Yeah. Being there? Their creation. Okay, so he would have had that in John. Is that what you're saying? Okay, in John, yes, at the very beginning, Jesus is the Word. He's with God. He's an agent of creation. But you wouldn't have seen that in the Synoptic Gospels. That kind of language of Jesus as the Logos or the Word is not there. But again, let's focus on what would we not have known about Jesus? Sermon on the Mount. Excellent. Sermon on the Mount. Everybody remember the Sermon on the Mount? Where's the Sermon on the Mount found? Matthew. Okay, excellent. I'm reassured. Okay. And in Matthew, the Sermon on the Mount, I mean, it's a huge section. It takes up 3 chapters. It's a big deal. Lots of teaching in there. Does Luke have a Sermon on the Mount? Sort of. Luke has a Sermon on the Plain, right? So, Luke's got to be different, right? He's like, yeah, you have it on a mount, I'll have it on a plain, right? And so you've got a Sermon on the Mount, Sermon on the Plain. In Matthew's Gospel, the Sermon on the Mount actually makes a structural difference to the Gospel. If you'll recall, in Matthew's Gospel, there are 5 major teaching blocks. What does that mean? That means that as Matthew goes through his Gospel, Jesus does signs and wonders, and then bang, he gives you chapters of teaching. Signs and wonders, bam, another section of teaching, right? So the Sermon on the Mount is the first of these, and there are 5 of them. This is why Matthew is so long, right? The material just expands. John will not have read the Sermon on the Mount, right? One of these sections is also a harrowing condemnation of Pharisees. He would not have seen that, right? The bit about if someone sins, take them before an elder, and if they refuse, take them to 2 or 3, and then take them to the church. He wouldn't have seen that. All of that belongs here, right? One of these sections is also the apocalyptic discourse, where the end of the world is predicted. Matthew, Mark, and Luke each predict the end of the world. And they talk about the sun going dark and the moon, the blood, and he would not have seen that, right? Would not, the predictions in John are very different if they're predictions at all. What else? What else would John not have seen, or this reader not have seen in John's Gospel? So we've got the births. We've got these major teaching blocks in Matthew. Genealogy. Who said that? Just want to point and acknowledge. Genealogy. Yes. Genealogies. Which gospel has a genealogy? Matthew. Anybody else? How about Mark? Mark is going to be this. I'll get the silent treatment. Everybody, every time I ask about Mark, right? Like, who knows? The guy's so short, right? Does he really have anything at all, right? I mean, the closest thing to a genealogy you have in Mark's gospel is Jesus of Nazareth. That's it. That's it. That's where he's from, and that's not a boast, right? That's not a humble brag. I'm from Nazareth, right? No, keep that to yourself. Okay. So genealogy, yes, you've got Matthew begins with his genealogy, right? And this is the one that's really about David, just David all the way down to and Joseph himself turns out to be a son of David, right? And David is mentioned 5 times in that genealogy. You're really only supposed to show up where you belong, right? After Jesse, before Solomon. You don't get five shots, right? But the reason why you've got 5 Davids in the genealogy in Matthew is because Matthew uses David as a structuring device. So the genealogy, the title is, David, right? This is a genealogy of David, right? The son of David. And then you find David where he belongs. But then he also brackets the genealogy. The genealogy, as you may recall, is broken up into 3 sections, right? 3 sections. Each section has 14 generations. There's the use of 14 again, right? And so you go from the beginning to where David is. Then it says from David to the Babylonian captivity, from the Babylonian captivity, and then mentions Joseph as a son of David. So you get 5 mentions of David, right? So no genealogy in John's gospel. He would not have seen that kind of emphasis, right? Luke's gospel also has a genealogy. the genealogy in Luke, although I put it up here, actually comes after the birth stories, right? So in Matthew's gospel, begins with the genealogy and then moves into the birth story. Luke does the opposite. Starts with the birth stories and ends with the genealogy. Why does he do that? I'll throw it out there just in case. Does anybody remember what was the emphasis in Luke's genealogy? It's one of the last things that's said. As he goes, son of, son of, son of, and he ends on what note? Mary. What's that? Mary, but that's not the last thing, because remember, he starts and he goes backwards. That's the thing, right? In Matthew's gospel, he begins with Abraham and goes all the way to Jesus. In Luke's gospel, he starts with Jesus, Mary's included, but goes back to the son of what? Son of Adam, and then Son of God. That's an easy one to miss. But what Luke has done is reversed it so that he can rhetorically end with Jesus as the Son of God, right? Now that's something that's similar, in this sense, to what John has to offer, because John will have Jesus out there saying he's the Son of God. As a matter of fact, the Jews get upset with him. They're like, well, by saying you're his son, you're equating yourself with him. And they pick up stones, right? So that theme is there, but it is not connected to this genealogy as you have in Luke. Now, the reason why Luke does it this way, he has it after the birth stories, is really to make kind of a rhetorical point. If you'll recall, the birth story in Luke's gospel is very festive, right? Remember, an angel comes to Mary, blessed art thou among women. I mean, there's all kinds of prophecies and angels and whatnot. And who turns, and Elizabeth, right? Who is Elizabeth? What's that? Mary's cousin, and who does she have in her belly? John the Baptist. So John the Baptist is his cousin, and he even leaps in the womb when he hears the good news, right? I mean, it's a very festive scene, right? But what Luke does is he emphasizes from the get-go Jesus as God's son. In chapter 1, there's a prophecy. The son that you will have will be the Son of the Most High. It's the first thing you hear. He's going to be God's son, right? And then when you go to chapter 2, you have that humorous little episode with the smart aleck Jesus, right? Where he's in the temple as a child, and it turns into, Home Alone, right? Remember that whole story, right? The parents leave. Where is he? Where's Johnny? Oh no, we left him. Amber Alert goes out, and they come back. We're worried sick about you. And what does he say? Shouldn't I be about my Father's business? I.e., I'm God's son, right? So you have a prophecy that says he's the Son of God. You have Jesus himself saying, I'm the Son of God, right? And then when you get to chapter 3, and the genealogy begins with Jesus, ends rhetorically with Son of God, right? So in a very creative, interesting way, Luke brings us to this idea of Jesus as God's son, but he does so very differently from how John will do it. Right? And this is what I mean about how these gospel writers have taken these traditions about Jesus, about his identity, where he's from, who are his connections, what he did, but they kind of put it in this creative, reinterpretive mold. It's almost like a kaleidoscope. You'll find the similarities, but they're in different places, right? It is kind of like you go to a museum and you can see the same picture in 4 different squares, and they're just a little different colors, different placement, but they're all contributing something, right? Luke is contributing the idea he's God's son, but he does it with a genealogy in that particular way. Okay, so no genealogy, no birth stories, major teaching blocks. What else would he never have read or seen? Parables, who said that? All right, nice. Parables. That's right. If you didn't know it, folks, newsflash. Put on your seatbelt. Not one single solitary parable in John's gospel. The Greek word for parables is not even used. The closest thing that you have there is that Jesus spoke in figures or figurative language. That's the Johannine language that is used. But an actual parable? No, sir. So he would never have seen a parable. Now, of course, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, parables galore. Parables everywhere. And the parables are all used in different ways. And contrary to what we're used to thinking about parables, most of us, at least growing up, you think of them as a simple little story, agricultural, that makes a point, and that even a child could understand it, right? You're often told, yeah, Jesus didn't have to get a PhD. He could tell, little stories that the common man would understand, right? And that's true until you read the Bible, right? And then you realize that the parables are actually complex. And you realize that most people who heard the parables did not know what he was talking about, right? Or if they understood the parables, what did they want to do? Kill them, right? That's quite a record, right? You get called to ministry and the Lord says, all right, you're going to speak the word. Excellent. I can't wait to win souls. Not so fast. They're not going to understand you, but if they do, they'll want to kill you. Right? That's counterintuitive and ironic, but yet that's exactly what you have in the parables. Now, this is why Jesus has to explain the parables. Now, it's not an even distribution in terms of meaning in all of these, because in some cases, for example, Luke, who gives us plenty of parables. As a matter of fact, Luke, this is kind of the equivalent in Luke of Matthew's gospel. Matthew has these major 5 teaching blocks, right? Luke also has a teaching section, but it's usually known as the travel narrative, And this is essentially a section of 11 plus chapters where Jesus is in Galilee. He's in Galilee up here. And he is going to end up in Jerusalem. But for 11 chapters or so, he's headed there. It's the equivalent of a road trip, right? You see the road trip, you ever watch those movies on a road trip, right? Where all the drama happens during the road trip. What's going on before, when you get there, doesn't matter. It's all the misadventures of the road trip, right? Well, Luke gives us a road trip of about 11 chapters where Jesus is meandering and he's heading towards Jerusalem. He even tells you repeatedly, he's heading to Jerusalem, he's heading to Jerusalem. And in this section that he has kind of structured his gospel with, he includes parables that are not found anywhere else. 10 parables that are distinctive to Luke. And what Luke often does, because remember, parables can be tricky, is he will arrange them thematically, right? So that there's a greater chance you'll understand them. Like he wants you to understand them. Not like in Mark's gospel. In Mark's gospel, if you'll recall, Jesus tells the parable, the sower goes to sow, right? And you got the 30 and the 60 and the 100, the good soil, the bad soil, all of that kind of stuff, right? We know that and we think we know it. But when the disciples first heard it, they're like, great story, but what are you talking about? Right? And what does Jesus do? As he likes to do in Mark's gospel, flies off the handle a little bit. He says, how long do I have to be with you for you to understand, right? And he says, well, don't worry. To you has been given the secrets of the kingdom. But to everybody else, I will speak in parables. What does that sound like? It sounds like riddles. I'll explain these riddles to you. Everybody else is just going to get riddles. And he explains the parables, right? So there you have Jesus explaining the parable only to a select few. Knowing the parables makes a difference between whether you're an insider or outsiders. The outsiders don't get the explanation, the insiders do. Luke's gospel, like I was saying, he arranges them thematically. So for example, everybody knows the parable of the lost sheep, right? What does the shepherd do? Leaves the 99, goes looking for the one. When he finds it, what happens? He rejoices, right? Oh, my sheep, I mean, you might wonder about that, but you got 99. I hope you lock them up or something, right? Just leave them, right? Rejoices, I found that one. Well, that parable is juxtaposed right next to the parable of the woman who lost the coin. And what does she do? Sweeps up her whole house until she finds it. Here it is, I found it. Now, after each one of these parables, Luke chimes in and says, so it is with every soul who repents, right? Like it's talking about the joy of coming into God's kingdom. It's a lost coin found. It's a lost sheep found. And then right after those two comes the classic parable about something that is lost. Can anybody remember? The prodigal son, but it's filled with humanity and drama and intrigue and shame. And at the very end, the father runs out to meet him. My son who was lost is found, who was dead is now alive. There's even a little bickering there and jealousy over it, right? What are you giving him, the red carpet for? He squandered everything. And Luke doesn't even have to say, as he said with the other two, so is there rejoicing in heaven over a sinner who repents. So parables are everywhere in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They show up differently. There are some parables, like we said in Luke, that aren't anywhere else. Some of the parables have kind of a different thrust to them. They're rearranged. So again, the gospel writers are arranging this material and editing this material in certain ways for you to understand. Again, not solely Jesus as an historical figure. He is an historical figure, but what he meant, what his teachings were about, and perhaps even more importantly, what you ought to do about it, right? That's the thing you ought to be remembering. You are to be injecting yourself in the story, right? Am I like one of the Pharisees or the Sadducees? Am I a Judas? Am I a John? Am I the beloved disciple? I think we're all beloved disciples, right? At least we like to think so. I'm the guy leaning on him, right? Which is ironic because the guy's just anonymous. Nobody knows who that is, right? Okay. Parables. Excellent. Anything else that John would not have seen? What's that? The calling of the disciples. Interesting. He would have seen an abbreviated version of that, right? There is a calling, and this is the tricky thing about John, again, as we look at these together, the sequence of the callings are a little different. There's even a disciple that gets called whose name doesn't appear in the Synoptic Gospels, right? Give you a hint. Starts with an N. Nathaniel, that's right. Who's Nathaniel? He's not in the other Gospels. Now, of course, people try to reconstruct this and they say, well, maybe he was Bartholomew. Sometimes they had two names or whatever, right? We can go on about that. But the bottom line is that the calling of the disciples looks different in John's Gospel, right? As a matter of fact, don't tell anybody about this, right? This won't leave this room, right, as I'm on live, right? The beloved disciple, right? You got to love that name. You might as well say teacher's pet, right? The teacher's pet may have been a disciple of John. John who? What's that? The Baptist. The Baptist. And this is speculation, but we'll get to it, but I'll give it to you now. When Jesus calls Andrew, right, he's described as two of John's disciples. Andrew, and it was another unnamed disciple, right? And you never get his name. And it's not Peter because Andrew goes and gets Peter after he gets called. So who that unnamed disciple is, we're never told, right? And the way John does things, you're like, well, could that be? Scholars speculate that may be the first indication of the beloved disciple's origin, perhaps a disciple of John. Don't know that, but just the differences that you have there. Okay, so the calling of the disciples. Speaking of disciples, Matthew, Mark, and Luke love to give us the names of the 12 disciples, right? Oh, there was Simon and this and that and the other, all the way, I could never get them straight, right? But there they are, all 12 of them. John never gives us the 12 names. Matter of fact, he simply refers to them as starts with a T, the 12. He just says the 12. What does that tell you if he can just refer to these people as the 12? They're already known. I don't got to list them off for you. They're already a recognized group, perhaps already part of the lore of the story of Jesus, which may indicate that this gospel was written much, much later. Presumably an earlier gospel has to explain a lot of things. A later one, you know them, the 12, right? The 12. Very interesting. Okay, so we've got the calling of the disciples, the parables, birth stories. I mean, if we may throw in the circumstances of Jesus' birth. We alluded to Luke, where you have this, festive scene, right? Where there are angels visiting and shepherds and all. It's the beautiful Christmas scene. There's another Christmas scene that doesn't make it under the tree. Anybody know what that one is? What also happens around the birth of Jesus? Slaughter of the innocents. Do you have that under your tree? Right? I had never even thought about it, right? But there's a few years ago, I went on a trip to Puerto Rico. We were in Old San Juan, and we went to visit this convent. And they had one of these, what do you call things where they have just the biblical scenery. They have everything, right? And wouldn't you know it, as I'm looking at it, I see angels and shepherds, and I'm going, and then I see a little section with Roman soldiers and with their swords out and little babies. And it was the first time I had ever seen depicted, like you do in a Christmas tree, right? The slaughter of the innocents, which is every much a part of the Christmas story, right? It's very dark. Herod wants to get rid of Jesus. And he sacrifices, thousands of kids to do that, right? John would never have heard that story, right? Or the reader would never have known that story or seen that story. And by the way, think about that story and what it's doing there. In Matthew's gospel, it plays a very important role. Because one of the identities of Jesus that is really highlighted repeatedly, just like he's the son of David, right? Is that Jesus is the second Moses, or another Moses, right? And so Jesus appears in scenes that mirror and echo the story of Moses, right? So if you recall, when Moses was born, what were the circumstances there? You had Pharaoh, a tyrant, saying these people multiply like rabbits. We got to get rid of the boys, right? And he has the children killed. And of course, Moses, the male boys, escapes. He's rescued, and he becomes a great leader. Well, that same pattern of a tyrant killing innocents in order to get rid of this individual is what Herod is doing in Matthew's gospel. It follows that same pattern. In Matthew's gospel, more than in any other, Jesus is often on a mount, right? Who was often on a mount in the book of Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy? Moses, right? When Jesus does his teaching on the Sermon on the Mount, he says, you've heard Moses say, but I say to you, right? So you have this emphasis on Moses. So even a story as dark and foreboding as the slaughter of the innocents is retold so that you could understand that the one who is like Moses is here. You have to remember, Moses, before he died, he said, God will raise up a prophet like me. Listen to him, right? So in structuring the gospel in this particular way, anyone familiar with the Moses story would have seen the echoes and would have understood that the presentation of this story is so that those who hear this might listen to him. That's Jesus. Of course, now, is Jesus connected to Moses in John's gospel? Absolutely. but John does it in a different way. And again, that's the fascinating thing. There seems to have been no shortage of creative ways of retelling, reconnecting, reimagining, reshaping the stories where the connections to Moses, to Jacob, to Isaac, to the Old Testament, to the prophets, they're all there, but they come at us in different directions, right? It's almost as if they are just living and breathing and connecting with us. They're very bewildering in that sense, right? Like you would never know if you didn't pay attention that in Matthew's gospel, during that whole birth narrative, Mary has no speaking parts. Don't say a word. Like she's not even the star. As a matter of fact, she's only mentioned, apart from the genealogy, when Joseph realizes she's what? Pregnant. You know, she has no say. She's not explaining anything in the story. He's like, oh my God, somebody's going to think it was me. I got to quietly divorce her. And he's told by an angel in a dream, don't worry about it. It's God's baby. Apparently that was okay. He's like, okay, all right, we'll do that, right? You go to Luke's gospel, Joseph has no speaking parts. Yeah, he's certainly not the donor. Right? What do you have? You have the angels and visitations from God, and it's festive. Right? So they're getting at the same thing, but in different ways. And if I were to ask, where was Jesus born? This is a low-hanging fruit. Bethlehem. What season is this? This is August, right? We had Christmas. Okay, yeah. Bethlehem. It's in the story. Okay. All right. Bethlehem is interesting because certainly you've got him born in Bethlehem. And in Matthew's gospel, you know why it's important for Jesus to be born in Bethlehem? Who else was born in Bethlehem? David, that's right. And if you really want to impress the Lord, why was David born in Bethlehem? Who was in Bethlehem before him? Well, you can say Saul, Old Testament, think Old Testament. Give you a hint. It's a woman. Ruth, the Moabite. Remember that? And she's only in Bethlehem because she was married to Naomi's son who died, and she followed her to Bethlehem, right? And if you read the book of Ruth, at the very end, there is a genealogy, and the genealogy ends with King David, right? So that the point of that whole little book is to demonstrate how, at least in the Old Testament, the Davidic lineage has Moabite blood, but also the way in which David ended up in Bethlehem. And of course, him showing up, Jesus being born in Bethlehem, further associates him with David, right? Luke, you also have him born in Bethlehem. Mark, any Bethlehem in Mark? No, because you don't have a birth story. No mention of Bethlehem. No mention at all of Bethlehem. Now, in John's gospel, there's an interesting detail. Can't believe this is all introduction. I hope that's okay. You got to get ready for the material, right? Bethlehem is mentioned in John's gospel. Now, it has no birth story, no manger, no angels, no shepherds, none of that. But the Jews in one section are debating with the disciples of Jesus. And disciples, of course, they're out there evangelizing, right? Hey, he's the Messiah. And the Jews say, wait a minute. Isn't he supposed to have been born in Bethlehem? Now, if someone asks you a question like that, what is that assuming? He wasn't, or nobody knows about that. Now, you could say, if I were writing John's gospel, I could do it better, right? Yeah. I would have said, well, that's the perfect opportunity, John, to say, hey, guess what? He was according to this prophecy. Just read Matthew or Luke. But he doesn't do that. What does he say, or the disciples say? They just say, come meet him. Come meet him. And that's a really interesting move in John's gospel. More often than not, when there is a question about who Jesus is and whether to believe him, the gospel writer does not go to just the facts, ma'am. Yes, here it is. It's almost as if those things aren't really what's important. Come meet him. The Samaritan woman, remember? She's sitting with Jesus by a well. He's asking for water. She's like, yeah, I can't even believe you're talking to me. You're a Jew, right? You don't even got a bucket, right? It's going on. And by the end of the conversation, she's like, I think this is the Messiah. And she runs to her village and she tells the people there, and she's like, I think I met the Messiah, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, what? And she's like, well, come meet him. Come meet him, right? It's the same thing with the relationship with truth, right? What is the truth? Yeah, Jesus probably could explain the origin of the cosmos and meaning and all kinds of things, all kinds of truths if he's in fact the Son of God. But then what is that? I am the way, the truth, and the life. So there's this interesting relationship with historical details where if there are questions about his identity or the prophecies or where he was born, rather than going into, let me prove it to you, it goes into, let's come meet him, right? Or come see the signs that he does, right? It's a very different mode. And so each of these gospels, they are all engaged in attempting to present a compelling portrait of Christ, who he was, what he was about, but their strategies for demonstrating it or rendering it compelling will differ from gospel writer to gospel writer. And because we are so far removed from it, it's easy for us to miss this or see it or understand it, right? And it's a really sobering moment. I can't tell you how many times I have felt just a conviction about humility. You ought not to pretend you have a lock on everything or truth or how to understand it, when the very word pulls you in different directions and prompts you to search your soul for meaning. It's almost like it's baked in there, right? You are to wonder, you are to think, you are to be puzzled, you are to find satisfaction, growth, inspiration, models, but also perplexity. And I would argue that that's in fact when one is ready to have faith. When you've got no more facts to cling to. When it's like, I just don't know, but it is compelling. That's where faith comes in, right? If you can prove it, if you can show it, that's evidentiary. It's evidentiary. Okay. Speaking of Mary having no speaking parts in one and speaking parts in the other, Mark's gospel, pop quiz. Are both Mary and Joseph in John's gospel? I'm getting a tepid. If you had to choose one, which one might be there? Did I hear it? Mary? Mary. Okay, yes. Joseph never shows up in Mark's gospel at all. Not once, not ever. Mary, yes. Jesus' brothers and sisters, yes. Now here's what's interesting. Jesus is known as the son of what? Not God, but what profession? Well, he's son of man, but carpenter, right? Like to work with his hands, right? The son of the carpenter, and the carpenter was who? Joseph, right? Joseph. Now that detail actually comes from Matthew's gospel. He's the son of a carpenter, because Matthew has Joseph as the carpenter, right? Mark's gospel, which was written first, right? And if you'll recall from our sessions on the gospels, Matthew essentially draws from Mark's material and expands it. And Mark's gospel It's Jesus who's the carpenter. Look it up in Mark 6, right? When Jesus is speaking, he has this authority, and they're puzzled. Like, with what authority does this man speak this way? He said, well, we know him. This is Jesus, the carpenter, and are not his brothers and sisters and his mother here with us? No mention of Joseph, which is really interesting, because then that gives a further resonance to Jesus as the Son of God at the opening of that gospel. He's the Son of God. Literally, there's no father figure. And if you recall, he was called a bastard, just someone without a father, right? And Mark makes no attempt to compel us one way or the other about what happened to that father figure. There's kind of speculation. Some people say, well, he died, blah, blah, blah. Mark doesn't mention it. Matthew does. Luke does. Come to John, we see something that's almost unthinkable in terms of Mary and Joseph. Both of them are in John's gospel. Whew. All right, give me something to work with. Okay, thank God, something's there, right? One of them is never named. I could give you the answer, or you can wait till you get to the kingdom. Dr. Hernandez posed this question. Okay. Which one is not mentioned by name? I'll be honest, I never thought about it till I had to. Till I actually started reading the Bible. I'm like, where is this person? Anybody want to hazard a guess? Mary. How unthinkable is that? I mean, we like to celebrate Mother's Day. She's not even given honorable mention. You know how she's referred to? Mother, or a little less personal, woman. Imagine me calling my mom woman, right? I'd have a slap mark on my face. I'll give you woman. Mary is never mentioned in that gospel by name. She is mentioned, Jesus' mother, his mother. And then you'll recall one of the earliest stories. Oh my God. Okay, one of the earliest stories has Jesus at a wedding feast, and the booze runs out. This is a great Christian story. The booze runs out, and his mother comes, and she's like, they're out of wine. It's like, woman, what does that have to do with me? And what's interesting, that language is curt. It's a little abrupt and unfriendly, right? Woman, what does that have to do with me? It's not my hour yet. Which is always confounding to me, because then he goes ahead and does it, right? Mom asked, what are you going to do? Even if you're God, right? But she's never called Mary. Even at the end, when Jesus is on the cross, and he looks at the beloved disciple, and he looks at his mother, says, woman, your child, your mother, right? So again, really astounding. We can only speculate and imagine what might have been the case there, that there's no mention of her whatsoever. She's there, but she's not mentioned. Well, the point of all of that, and we'll do more of this as we move into John's material more explicitly, is to kind of get a sense for the strange things we'll see and won't see, and perhaps nurture a spirit of wonder and openness to receive what's in here and even understand what's not. And what does that do to our broader understanding? And I don't know about you, and everybody goes through their own journey, but the more mystified and fascinated I am by the material and what I know and what I don't know, what I thought I knew and realized I didn't, the more compelling it becomes. The more bewildered I am that John pulled this off, because he's called the simplest gospel. You are told that if you win a soul over for Christ, Give them the Gospel of John. It's the simplest one to understand. And you know what? The genius of it is that, yeah, you understand. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the bread of life. I am the living water. That you understand all of that. But then when you start going and say, well, how did he do this? And what got moved around? And how does this compare to the others? And how is it that you still are able to maintain the integrity of all four narratives while they literally are going in different directions and singing different tunes? It's a call for humility. It's a call for faith and for growing in the Lord. And I consider that the task of discipleship. We'll leave it there. Thank you for your attention.